A long row of metal storage units, numbered doors, concrete and rust, and the smell of things people left behind. One door is open, Unit 114. Inside dust, broken furniture, nothing worth stopping for, except a girl with a backpack and $10 just bought it anyway. She's 18. She was kicked out of her house last night. She has nowhere to sleep. She moves a garden tool, finds a gap, finds a locked bin, finds a key taped to the bottom of a toolbox with tape that's been there for years. 6 watches on blue foam, silver and gold in the flashlight beam. She doesn't sell them. She goes back the next morning. Behind the furniture, there's a trunk. Behind the false floor of the trunk, there are 3 boxes, each one labeled Vein Group, Do Not Destroy, 42 names, and a man in a good suit is already on his way. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound Audra had ever heard, not the words before it, not Bart's voice flat and final telling her to get out, not even the sound of her own sneakers on the hardwood as she walked to the door, not running, not dragging, just walking, because she had learned years ago that running in this house meant you cared about something, and caring gave people like Bart information they could use. Just the click. One small mechanical sound. And then the door was between her and everything she had ever called home. And Audra was standing on the front step with a backpack that weighed maybe 12 pounds and $30 in her left jacket pocket, and the November air hitting her face like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. She did not look back. Not because she was strong, because she knew what she would see. The shape of her mother behind the frosted glass of the narrow window beside the door. Standing there, still. The way Carol Lowe had been still for 6 years. The way she had learned to be still, the way some people learn to be invisible. It was something she had gotten very good at. Audra walked down the driveway. She walked past the truck that was technically hers, in a technical sense that had never once translated into actually using it when she needed it. She walked past the neighbor's yard with the inflatable holiday decoration that was still up from 2 Christmases ago, slowly deflating into itself, which struck her now as the most accurate thing she had seen in recent memory. She turned left at the end of the block. She kept walking. The thing about being kicked out at 8:47 on a Friday night was that the world did not immediately become hostile. It just became large. The streets were lit, and the convenience store on the corner was open, and a man was walking a dog that had absolutely no concerns about the situation Audra was in. The ordinary world continued in its ordinary way, while the very specific world of Audra Lowe rearranged itself around a new and unwelcome fact. She had nowhere to go. Not nowhere like a person who needed to think for a minute. Nowhere like a person who had burned through every option over 6 years of careful management and had finally run out of slack in every direction simultaneously. Her best friend from school had moved to Ohio last spring. The one friend she'd made at her part-time job at the grocery store worked closing shift tonight and lived with 3 roommates who were not Audra's friends. There was a girl from her old neighborhood who Audra thought might let her crash, but the last time they'd spoken was 7 months ago over a text about a playlist recommendation and showing up at someone's door on a Friday night with a backpack and no notice was a specific kind of desperate she wasn't ready to perform yet. She did the math on $30. It was a thing she did automatically. The habit of someone who had grown up in a house where the financial situation was always technically fine and practically unpredictable, where Bart's moods and Bart's projects and Bart's various ongoing calculations meant that what counted as available shifted without warning. $30. A meal, a bus ticket to somewhere. One night in the cheapest motel she could find within walking distance, though the cheapest motel within walking distance of this part of the city was not the kind of place a person wanted to spend a night alone with a backpack and no lock on the inside of the door. Or she could save it, all of it. She could find somewhere warm to sit for a night that didn't cost anything and save the $30 for a moment when she knew what she was doing. The bus station was 3 blocks from the main street. She had passed it 100 times and never once thought about what it would feel like to go inside for reasons other than catching a bus. The answer, it turned out, was fluorescent and hollow, and strangely comforting in the way that places full of strangers at strange hours were sometimes comforting. Because no one here was surprised to see her. No one was calculating what her presence meant or how long they were supposed to accommodate it. People came and went or sat for hours waiting. It was a place designed for transition, and Audra was in transition. She found a corner seat far from the ticket counter. Her backpack went between her feet. Her jacket stayed on. She settled in the way of someone who had read the room and understood the rules. Take up only your own space. Don't make eye contact unless you wanted conversation. Don't fall asleep until you were sure enough of your surroundings that it wasn't dangerous. She was not going to fall asleep. The station had maybe 20 people in it at this hour. A man asleep under a coat near the far wall. A family with 3 children in various stages of exhaustion piled around an enormous suitcase. 2 teenagers laughing at something on a shared phone screen. And near the vending machines, a woman Audra would have guessed at 70, sitting very straight in her seat with a large canvas tote bag on her lap, and both hands wrapped around it the way you held something you were afraid someone might take. She was not asleep. She was watching the door. Audra watched her watch the door for about 20 minutes. Watched her check a phone that was 1 generation older than old. Watched her look at the clock above the ticket counter, then at the door, then at her phone again. It was 9:45. At 10, the woman shifted in her seat. She put the phone in the canvas bag. She pressed her lips together in a thin line. No one had come. Audra had not intended to say anything. She genuinely had not planned it. But when the woman looked up and met her eyes across the row of plastic chairs, Audra said, "You waiting for someone?" The woman looked at her for a moment, assessing the way older women sometimes did, deciding whether the question was hostile or just curious. "My daughter," she said. She said 7 o'clock. Audra looked at the clock. It was now 10:02. She said, "I'm sorry." The woman made a small sound that was not quite a dismissal and not quite acceptance. "She gets busy," Audra said. "You need anything, water?" "I'm fine." But she said it without aggression, more like a reflex. The automatic response of a person who had been saying "I'm fine" for so long, it came out without being processed first. They sat for a while in the particular quiet of 2 people who have exchanged enough words to break the silence, but not enough to start a real conversation. Then the woman said, "You're too young to be sitting in a bus station at 10 o'clock on a Friday." Audra almost laughed. "You might be surprised. I'm Myrna." "Audra." Myrna looked at the backpack between Audra's feet. She didn't ask, but her expression did something that made Audra feel seen in a way she was not entirely comfortable with. "Where are you headed?" Myrna asked. "I'm not sure yet." Myrna nodded like this was a reasonable answer, like she had heard reasonable answers and unreasonable answers and knew the difference. "I'm not going anywhere either," she said, in the specific sense of the word. She paused. "I had to leave my house 2 months ago. Something with the paperwork, they said. A lawyer called." Very official voice. She smoothed a crease in her coat. "I didn't understand most of what they told me. I signed some things, and then I had to leave." Audra turned to look at her. "Your house." 31 years. Myrna said it quietly. "I moved in when my husband and I were first married. He passed 14 years ago, but I stayed. I kept everything the way he liked it. The garden, the paint colors." She stopped. "I had to leave most of the furniture. They said I could take personal items only." Audra did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, which turned out to be the right thing. They sat together for another hour. Myrna talked a little more, and Audra listened, and the fluorescent lights hummed, and the clock moved. At 11:30, a woman about Carol's age came through the main doors, looking harried and guilty, and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." And Myrna stood slowly and said, "I know, sweetheart," in the voice of someone who had made their peace with a certain kind of disappointment long ago. Before she left, Myrna pressed something into Audra's hand, a piece of paper folded once. "In case you need someone to talk to," she said. "I have a phone now. My granddaughter set it up." Audra looked at the paper after she left. A phone number. And in small, neat handwriting, Myrna Pratt, 412 Caldwell Street, in case you need an address. She folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket next to her phone. The night passed the way long nights in unfamiliar places passed, in increments. In the hour between 2 and 3 a.m., when the station got quieter and the lights seemed to get brighter, which was a cruel trick of physics she had not previously experienced. In the slow calculation of remaining charge on her phone, and remaining money in her pocket, and remaining days before she had to make a decision she was not ready to make, she did not sleep. At 6 a.m., a cleaning crew came through, and Audra bought a coffee from the vending machine with exact change and watched the city outside the window wake up through the smudged glass. Delivery trucks, a woman in scrubs moving fast, two men with coffee cups walking in opposite directions who nodded at each other without stopping. The world getting on with it, which was, she thought, what you did. You got on with it. The community board was 3 blocks from the station in the direction of the library, tacked to the side of a laundromat that was apparently the informal clearinghouse for the neighborhood's various needs and offerings. Audra had passed it before without looking. Today she stopped. Piano lessons, apartment for rent, free kittens, 8 weeks litter trained, a flyer for a church breakfast, a phone number for day labor, the number half torn away by someone who had already taken it. And below the day labor flyer, pinned crooked with a single thumbtack, a piece of paper that looked like it had been written by someone who did not do a lot of promotional writing. Storage unit auction. Unit number 114. Cash only. Address and date below. The handwriting was square and practical. The date was today. Audra read it twice. She had $29 and some change after the coffee. She had nothing else to do. She pulled out her phone and looked up storage unit auctions. She read for 7 minutes standing on the sidewalk outside the laundromat while a man pushed a shopping cart past her and a pigeon performed an elaborate negotiation with a piece of pretzel on the ground nearby. Storage unit auctions, she learned, were exactly what they sounded like. When the rent on a unit went unpaid for long enough, the facility had the legal right to auction the contents. You paid cash, you got the key, whatever was inside was yours. Most units were full of junk, some weren't. The address was 20 minutes away on foot. She walked. The storage facility was a long, low building set back from a commercial street, the kind of place designed to be functional and nothing else. Metal doors, concrete floors, numbers painted on each unit in fading yellow. A small crowd of maybe 15 people stood near the main entrance, which was more than Audra had expected and less than she'd feared. She observed from a distance first. She had learned this from years of walking into rooms where the rules were unclear and the consequences of getting them wrong were immediate. Watch before you move. Understand the shape of things before you commit to a direction. The crowd was older than her, mostly men, mostly in work clothes, the kind of people who did this with some regularity and had opinions about it. They talked among themselves with the easy shorthand of people who had been in the same rooms before. A few women, one of them holding a clipboard like she was the auctioneer's assistant, which it turned out she was. Audra drifted closer. She watched 3 units get open. The first one produced excitement in the crowd, bidding that moved fast and ended at $340. The second produced quiet, and then a man with a truck who bought it for $25 with the expression of someone who had been burned before, but retained a certain optimism about the nature of cardboard boxes. The third produced nothing, a unit so thoroughly empty that even the auctioneer looked embarrassed. By the time they got to number 114, Audra had understood the rhythm. The auctioneer, a man in his 50s with a voice designed for small crowds, rattled the padlock on the unit and pulled the door up. It stuck halfway, and he gave it a second pull, and it opened fully. The smell came out first. Dust, old fabric, a closed-air heaviness from a space that had been sealed longer than it was meant to be. Then the contents. An old couch with a cushion missing. Cardboard boxes stacked without order. A plastic storage bin with a cracked lid, chairs with legs that had seen better days, garden tools leaning against the back wall, rusted from some moisture that had found its way in through a seam somewhere. Three people who had drifted closer drifted back. A man near the front shook his head. "Do I have 20?" the auctioneer called. Silence. 15 nothing. "Who'll give me 10? This is $10 for everything in this unit, folks." She thought, "I have $29. She thought, "I have nowhere to sleep tonight." She thought, "This is probably stupid." She raised her hand. A few heads turned. The auctioneer looked at her with the expression of a man who was pleased to have a bidder and mildly surprised by which bidder it was. $10. "Do I have 15?" He looked around. Nobody moved. Going once, going twice. A beat. "Sold, $10. Someone chuckled. Not cruel exactly. More like the reflexive reaction of people who had seen optimistic beginners before and knew what usually came next. Audra did not acknowledge the chuckle. She walked up to the auctioneer's assistant, took a $10 bill from her pocket, and received in exchange a receipt and a small key on a wire loop labeled 114. $19 and change. That was what she had left. She stood in the doorway of the unit and looked at what she'd bought. It was, in fact, largely junk. She accepted this. She had known when she raised her hand that it was probably junk. She had bought it anyway because she had no other plan, and a small irrational feeling that sometimes the thing that looked the least promising was the thing that surprised you. And because $19 was not meaningfully different from $29 in terms of what it could accomplish, and because the couch, even with the missing cushion, had a certain quality that suggested it might be worth something to a vintage furniture dealer if she could figure out how to move it. She was not, she admitted to herself, thinking very clearly. She pulled the door most of the way closed to keep the dust in, set her backpack against the wall, and started going through boxes. She was methodical about it. Open box, examine contents, assess, set aside or reject, move on. Box 1, old magazines, Reader's Digest from the early 2000s. Not valuable. Interesting in a time capsule kind of way, but not valuable. Box 2, clothing. Men's clothes neatly folded despite the box being a cardboard box in a storage unit that had probably been here for months. Someone had cared about these things. A cardigan, 2 dress shirts still in their dry cleaning plastic, a belt that was better quality than it had any right to be given the context. Box 3, books. Old ones. She flipped through 2 of them and found the third one interesting, an older hardcover with a library sticker that probably hadn't been returned as much as transferred to private hands, which she set aside without thinking too much about why. Box 4, tools. And this was when things got a little more interesting. Because the tools were clean, not used and cleaned but maintained, there was a difference, and she knew it because her grandfather, before he died, had had a workshop in his garage that he treated like a museum of functional objects, and the tools in this box had the same quality. Cared for, organized, wrapped where wrapping made sense. At the bottom of the toolbox, under a carefully coiled extension cord, she found the flashlight, still in its packaging, brand new. She opened the packaging. The flashlight worked. She swept it across the back of the unit. That was when she saw the garden tools leaning against the back wall weren't quite touching the wall. There was a gap, narrow, maybe 4 inches between the tips of the handles and the concrete. She moved the garden tools carefully to one side. Behind them, flush against the wall and partially hidden by the angle, a plastic storage bin she had initially dismissed as the one with the cracked lid. It wasn't the same bin. This one was smaller. And it wasn't cracked. It was locked. She almost missed it because the lock was small. Not a padlock, a combination lock no bigger than her thumb set into the lid in a way that was almost integrated, almost designed to be overlooked. She sat down on the floor of the unit with the bin in front of her. She thought for a moment, then she went back to the toolbox. She went through it more carefully this time, not looking for tools, looking for something small, something that had been put somewhere specific. It took her 4 minutes. Under the extension cord, under the wrapping on the smallest screwdriver, taped to the inside of the bottom of the toolbox with a strip of electrical tape gone slightly dry at the edges, a small key. Not a standard key shape, a flat key, the kind that opened a combination reset or a small case lock. Her hands were steady. She fit the key into the lock on the bin. It turned. Inside the bin, wrapped in a hand towel that had been ironed flat, a box. Black, metal, the size of a thick hardcover book. A separate lock on this one, and the same flat key that had opened the bin opened this one too. She lifted the lid. 6 watches. On foam. Dark blue foam, the kind that held things in place with precision. 6 watches arranged in 2 rows of 3, silver and gold catching the flashlight beam. Not new, not antique in a dusty sense. Old in the way of things that had been made to last and had lasted. Audra looked at them for a long time. She was not someone who knew watches. She had worn the same rubber-banded fitness tracker for 3 years and considered that sufficient. But she knew the way you knew things, even without the vocabulary for them, that these were not ordinary. The weight of the case is visible even without touching. The detail of the dials, the way they were stored told her something about how the owner had thought about them. With a great deal of care, she closed the box carefully. She wrapped it back in the towel. She put it in her backpack where it sat against her spine, like something that had weight beyond its physical presence. She spent another hour in the unit, finished going through every box, found nothing else that rivaled the watches, made a mental inventory of what she had that was sellable and what wasn't. Then she locked the unit, shouldered her backpack, and went to find a pawn shop. Hollis Cade's shop was 4 blocks from the storage facility. She had not known it before today, but when she came around the corner and saw the sign in the window, she felt the specific relief of finding something you didn't know you were looking for. Cade's Fine Resale and Pawn, Estiche, 1987. We buy watches. The bell over the door made a sound that belonged in a different era. The shop smelled of metal and glass cleaner, and something older underneath the smell of a space that had absorbed 40 years of objects and their histories. The man behind the counter was older, 67 maybe or 70, with white hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of someone who had seen everything come through this door and maintained a professional neutrality about most of it. He looked at Audra, then at her backpack, then back at her face. "Help you," he said. "I have some watches." She set the backpack on the counter and opened it. She unwrapped the towel and set the black box in front of him. She opened the lid. He looked at the box. He did not pick anything up immediately. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't reach for the nearest one and start turning it over the way she had expected. He just looked. For a long, quiet moment, he just looked at all 6 of them arranged on the blue foam. Then he reached for one. He turned it over in his hands. He put his reading glasses on. He held it up to the light. He set it down and picked up the second one, then the third. At the third one, he stopped. He set it very carefully on the glass counter. He looked at Audra over his reading glasses with the expression of someone who was deciding exactly how to ask a question. "Where did you get these storage unit auctions?" she said. "Unit 114. Something moved in his face. She couldn't name it exactly. Not shock exactly. More like confirmation. Like he was hearing something he had already in some part of himself been waiting to hear. "What's your name?" he asked. "Audra." He nodded slowly, not at her, at something internal. Then he said, "Do you know a man named Walter Doss?" Audra shook her head. Hollis Cade took his reading glasses off and set them on the counter. He looked at the 6 watches. When he spoke, his voice had gone quieter than before. Not soft, just reduced, like a man conserving something. "He passed," Hollis said, 3 weeks ago." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "He used to come in here," he continued, "once a month for about 12 years. We drink coffee and talk. Not about much. Prices, the neighborhood. Sometimes about things that mattered. He picked up one of the watches again, turning it between his fingers the way someone handled something they recognized. He brought me these once, maybe 6 years ago, showed me each one, told me where he'd gotten them, what they were worth, why he kept them. He paused. He said someday someone might come in with these. He gave me a letter, told me not to open it until that happened. Audra said nothing. Her heart was doing something specific and unignorable in her chest. So you're saying, she started, I'm saying he expected this. Hollis put the watch back in the box. He looked at her steadily. He expected that someday someone would find those watches and bring them here. He paused again. He just didn't tell me when or who. Audra looked at the 6 watches on the blue foam. She thought about the toolbox with its carefully maintained tools, the organized contents of the bin, the flat key taped to the bottom with electrical tape that had dried just slightly at the edges, meaning it had been there for a while. Not placed recently, placed with intention and then waited on. She thought about Myrna's voice in the bus station. They said I had to leave. I signed some things. I didn't understand most of what they told me. She thought about a man named Walter Doss, who had put things away carefully in a storage unit and then stopped paying the fees and then died 3 weeks ago. He knew the unit would go to auction. He wanted it to. Why? The letter, Audra said. Can I see it? Hollis studied her for a moment. Then he nodded once slowly and turned toward the door behind the counter. Let me get us both some coffee, he said. This might take a little while. The letter was in an envelope that had been sealed with tape, not with the adhesive flap. Hollis set it on the glass counter between them and 2 paper cups of coffee that smelled much better than bus station vending machine coffee, and said nothing while Audra looked at it. The envelope was white, standard letter size. Walter Doss had written one word on the front in the same square, practical handwriting she would later learn to recognize as his Hollis. That was all. He brought it in 14 months ago, Hollis said. He wrapped both hands around his cup. He told me when someone brings you those 6 watches, open this. He said if nobody ever brings them, burn it when I'm gone. He paused. I wasn't sure which one was going to happen. Audra looked at the envelope. 14 months ago, he was planning this. He was 81 years old, and he was planning this. You should open it, she said. I was waiting for you to say that. Hollis slid a letter opener under the tape. Careful, unhurried, the way of someone who respected what things contained before he knew what they were. Inside 2 pages folded in thirds, and a smaller envelope inside that one. This smaller one had a different name on it. Not Hollis. Dana Krell SQ. And below the name, a phone number. Hollis unfolded the 2 main pages and read them without rushing. He read the whole thing before he said anything. Audra watched his face, and his face did not change much, but his hands tightened slightly on the pages in a way she thought he was probably unaware of. When he finished, he set the pages on the counter and turned them to face her. You should read this, he said. She read. Walter had written with precision. Not elegance, not the voice of someone trying to be remembered. The voice of someone trying to be useful after the fact. He wrote that his name was Walter Harold Doss, that he had worked as a certified public accountant for 38 years, that for the last 12 years of his career and the 14 years of his retirement, he had been aware of and documenting financial practices by an entity called Vane Group that constituted in his professional assessment systematic fraud, predatory lending, disguised as property assistance, and in several cases outright forgery of legal documents. He wrote that Vane Group was run by his nephew Prescott Vane. He wrote that. His nephew. He wrote it without apparent emotion, and Audra found that more devastating than if he had written it with fury. He explained that the documentation he had accumulated over 30 years was stored in a place he believed Prescott could not access, because Prescott did not know about it, and the only way to ensure Prescott did not know about it was to tell no one. He had transferred the documentation to storage unit 114 18 months prior. He had then, deliberately and with full knowledge of the consequences, stopped paying the monthly storage fee. He knew the unit would be auctioned. He knew his name would not be on the auction listing because the account was held under a secondary name. He knew that the contents would appear to be worthless. He was counting on it. He wrote that the person reading this letter had found the watches and brought them to Hollis, which meant they were not someone who had come looking for anything specific, which meant Prescott had not sent them, which meant they were, in his estimation, the right person. He wrote, "I am sorry I cannot be more specific about what right means. I only know it when I see the logic of it. And the logic of this is that someone with no stake in it found the unit, found the box, found the watches, and brought them here, rather than to the first buyer they could reach." That tells me something. At the bottom of the second page, a single paragraph set apart from the rest. Donna Krell has been waiting for this documentation for 2 years. She is an attorney who specializes in real estate fraud. I contacted her in the early stages of my documentation process. She reviewed what I had at the time and told me it was insufficient, that to move forward, she needed a complete and organized evidentiary package, not fragments. What is in that storage unit is the complete package. Please give her envelope to whoever reads this letter if they are willing to receive it. Audra set the pages down. She picked up the smaller envelope. She looked at the name on the front. She was 18 years old. She had $19. She had nowhere to sleep tonight, and she had spent her last $10 on a storage unit full of what was apparently 30 years of fraud documentation about a man she had never heard of. She set the envelope down on the counter. Hollis was watching her. She said, "What did he want me to do with this?" Hollis said, "I think he wanted you to decide." She looked at the envelope. She picked it up again and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket next to Myrna's phone number. Hollis said, "The watches, before you do anything else." She looked at him. "They're valuable," he said. "Not all equally, but together the condition, the provenance, I'd put them in the range of 45 to 55,000, with the right buyers and the right time." Audra sat very still. "That's a wide range," she said, because she needed to say something. "It's an honest range. I could be wrong in either direction." He picked up his coffee. "I'm not going to buy them from you. I want you to know that. You came to me in good faith, and I'm going to operate the same way. I'll help you find buyers if you want. I'll tell you who to call and what to say." He paused. "But I'd recommend you don't sell anything yet." She said, "Why?" He looked at the 2 pages of Walter's letter still on the counter. "Because," he said, "if you decide to do something with that envelope, your situation changes. And you should know what your situation is before you start converting assets." She said, "Have you done this before?" He almost smiled. "Not quite. Not this specifically. But I've seen people in trouble make fast decisions about valuable things and regret it." He stood. "Come back tomorrow. Sleep somewhere safe first." "I don't have," she started. He reached under the counter and put a room key on the glass. She stared at it. "There's a motel 2 blocks west," he said. "I own the building. There's an empty room. It's not fancy." He paused. Walter would have wanted someone to have a place to think. He was specific about that. Audra did not cry. She was not generally a crier. Not because she was strong, but because she had learned early that crying in front of people gave them access to something she needed to keep for herself. But she came closer in that moment than she had in a very long time. She picked up the key. She said, "Thank you." Hollis said, "Don't thank me. Just think carefully." The motel room was small and clean and had a lock on the inside of the door that worked, which was the main thing she cared about. She set the backpack on the desk and opened it and took out the black box and set it on the desk too, and looked at both of them for a moment. $19, a room key, 2 pages of a dead man's careful handwriting, a smaller envelope in her jacket pocket addressed to a lawyer she had never heard of. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she thought about Bart's voice saying, "Get out," and the click of the deadbolt, and her mother's shape behind the frosted glass, still and silent hands at her sides. She thought about Myrna in the bus station holding her canvas bag with both hands and watching the door that her daughter wasn't coming through. She slept for 9 hours. She did not dream about anything she could remember. In the morning, she went back to the storage unit. She went back not because she had made any decisions. She went back because she had paid for it, and because the thing Walter had left there was still there, and because she was not the kind of person who walked away from something she had started. This time she brought the flashlight. She went through the remaining boxes with more care than she had the day before, not because she expected to find anything, because thoroughness was the thing she had that other people in this situation might not have. She had time. She had attention. She had, in the absence of everything else, the ability to look carefully at things other people dismissed. The couch had nothing behind the cushions and nothing taped to the underframe. The garden tools were what they appeared to be. But in the back left corner of the unit, behind the couch and the garden tools and two cardboard boxes she'd moved out of the way, there was a piece of furniture she had noticed but not examined. A trunk, low and flat, maybe 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, dark wood old with a hasp on the front that had a lock. She had seen it the day before and noted it without examining it, because at that point she had already found the watches and thought that was probably the discovery. She was wrong. She moved the couch far enough to get to it. She tried the flat key she'd found in the toolbox, the same key that had opened the bin in the black box. The trunk opened, neatly folded clothes on top, men's clothes. She moved them carefully and set them aside. Dress shirts, a cardigan, the smell of cedar from a small block tucked in the corner. She pressed on the bottom of the trunk. Hollow. The same sound she had learned to listen for. The bottom of the trunk came up in sections, not a hidden panel exactly, more like a false floor built to be removable, designed by someone who had some skill with wood and a specific purpose in mind. Below it, 3 document boxes wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting sealed with packing tape, stacked flat. She lifted them out one at a time. Each one had a strip of white tape on the lid. On the tape, in that square practical handwriting, vein group, "Do not destroy." She sat on the floor of the storage unit with 3 document boxes in front of her, in the November light coming in through the half-open door, and she was very, very still for a long moment. Then she opened the first box. The contents were organized, tabbed and dated and cross-referenced in the manner of someone who had spent a career making financial information comprehensible to people who didn't want to deal with it. The top section: correspondence. Letters between a law firm she didn't recognize and an entity called Caldwell Property Solutions, which she also didn't recognize. The letters were formal and full of language she didn't fully understand yet, but she understood the dates. The letters started in 1999 and ran in the first folder alone to 2006. The second section: financial records. Transfer documents, receipts, account numbers with annotations in Walter's handwriting explaining what each one was and why it mattered. The third section: what Walter had labeled in a tab at the front, individuals. 42 names, each with a subfolder. Each subfolder containing a name, an address, a date, a transaction, and a summary paragraph typed explaining in plain language what had been done to that person and how. She read the first 3. She had to stop, not because she couldn't continue, because she needed to. She pressed her back against the wall of the unit and she breathed. What was in those folders was not abstract. It was not corporate language and legal complexity. It was 42 specific people who had each, through variations on the same process, lost their homes. Some had been convinced to sign refinancing documents that were not what they were told. Some had been shown fake legal orders claiming their properties were subject to eminent domain and had accepted settlements that were a fraction of the actual value. Some had simply been served with forged documents stating they owed back taxes or fees they did not owe, and when they couldn't immediately produce the funds, had been moved through a legal process. They didn't understand quickly enough to stop. 42 people. She was about to go back to the first box when she heard footsteps. Not the regular footsteps of the facility staff who moved in a particular way down these corridors. Heavier. More than one person. and the quality of movement that came with a destination, purposeful, not browsing. She didn't think. She put the lids back on the boxes. She shoved them into the trunk. She didn't get the false floor exactly back in place, but she got the clothes back on top. She closed the trunk lid. She stood up. She moved to the front of the unit and partially closed the door from the inside, leaving a 4-inch gap, and stood to the side of the opening in the shadow. Two men came down the corridor. One of them, she would later learn, was a lawyer. She identified him by the briefcase and the suit and the expression of professional neutrality worn by people who charged by the hour and had learned to never look surprised. The other man was 50-something, well-dressed in a way that was specific, not rich exactly or not obviously, but accustomed to being the most significant person in any given room. Silver at his temples, posture that communicated something about how he expected to be received. He stopped in front of Unit 114. He looked at the door. It was open. She hadn't been able to close it completely from the inside without making noise. He looked at it for a moment. The lawyer said something quietly. She didn't catch it. The man in the good suit said, "It's fine." He stepped forward and pushed the door fully open. He looked around the unit, at the couch, at the tools against the wall, at the open boxes she had been going through, still displaced from their original positions, at Audra standing to the side with her flashlight in her hand. He looked at her without surprise, like he had expected someone to be here, just not specifically her. "Hello," he said, pleasant, measured, the voice of a man who had learned to make every register sound like he was in control of it. Audra said, "Hi." She waited. He waited. The lawyer shifted slightly. "I'm Prescott Vane," the man said. "I believe some of the items in this unit may belong to my family. My uncle Walter Doss passed recently. There was some confusion about the storage arrangement." He paused. "The facility is looking into whether the auction should have proceeded at all given the circumstances." Audra said, "I have a receipt." "Of course you do." Still pleasant. "And we're not disputing your purchase in any adversarial sense. My concern is simply that certain items, documents primarily, may have been included in the auction in error. Personal papers that have no monetary value but are of family significance." He was very good. She had to give him that. He was very, very good. Because everything he said was technically possible. It was the kind of statement that a reasonable person would hear and think, "Oh, that makes sense, let me help." She said, "What documents specifically?" A small pause. "Files, possibly in boxes." She said, "I'm still going through things. I'd need to know exactly what you're looking for." "Of course." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. Not his, the lawyer's. "My associate can follow up. There's no rush. We understand you purchased the contents in good faith, and we're not here to create any difficulty." He set the card on top of the nearest box. "We just wanted to make personal contact." It seemed more respectful than going through the facility. He looked around the unit once more, at the trunk in the back left corner. His gaze went to it and stayed for 1 second. 1 second too long. Then he looked back at Audra with an expression that was still pleasant, still measured. "Enjoy your weekend," he said. They left. She waited until she couldn't hear footsteps anymore. Then she sat down on the floor of the unit and stared at the trunk and tried to slow her heartbeat down to a manageable speed. He knew it was in a trunk. He didn't know what she had found yet. He couldn't. She hadn't had the boxes open long enough for him to see anything from the doorway. But he knew there was something to look for, and he knew it was probably in that trunk, and he had come here personally, which meant he was not calm about this in the way his voice had implied. She picked up the lawyer's card. She read the name. She put it in her pocket. Then she picked up her phone and called Hollis. He answered on the second ring. She said, "I found the files, 3 boxes. He said, "Are you safe?" "Yes, but someone just came." A pause. "The nephew." He said his name was Prescott Vane. Another pause. Longer. "Come back here," Hollis said. "Don't take the files yet. Lock the unit. Come here first." She locked the unit. She walked back to the shop. Hollis was in the back room when she arrived. He had been drinking coffee and reading something which he set aside when she came in. She told him what had happened in the order it happened. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said he looked at the trunk. Yes. He said he knows what's in there, or he suspects. Yes. He stood and went to the cabinet behind the counter. He opened it and took out a sealed envelope. He set it on the counter between them. Walter gave me this 14 months ago, he said. He gave me the watch letter in this. He said the second envelope goes to whoever the letter says it goes to, but only after you read the letter and decide they're the right person. She looked at the envelope. It was sealed the same way as the first one, tape over the flap. I've been thinking since you left yesterday, Hollis said, about what makes someone the right person, and I keep coming back to the same thing. He looked at her steadily. You didn't sell those watches yesterday, and you went back this morning. She said, that's not very much. No, he said, but in my experience, it's usually enough. He slid the envelope across the counter. This one had no name on the outside. On the inside, she found a single page, a list, 12 names, each with a phone number. At the top of the list, a note from Walter. These are people who have been waiting for what is in that storage unit. Journalists, one investigator, and an attorney. I approached each of them over the past 4 years. Each told me the same thing, come back when you have the complete documentation. The documentation is now complete. I ran out of time to do this myself. Whoever is reading this did not run out of time. Yet. She read the list. Sixth name from the top, Dana Krell Esquire. The same name that had been on the sealed envelope inside Hollis's letter. 2 different entry points, both leading to the same person. Walter had been thorough. She said Hollis, he said yes. She said, tell me about the files. What does it take to actually, she searched for the right word. Use something like this legally. I'm not a lawyer. He sat down. But I know Dana Krell, not personally, but Walter mentioned her. She's done this before. Not this specific thing, but this type of thing. He paused. Audra, you don't have to be the person who does anything. You can give the files to someone else and walk away. That's an option. She said, is it? He looked at her. He came here, she said. Today, he came here and he looked at the trunk. She put the list down on the counter. He knows the unit was auctioned. He's going to figure out who bought it. It's not a secret. She paused. If I walk away, he knows where the files went. Hollis was quiet. She said, I'm not walking away. She said it not with drama, more like a statement of fact she was discovering as she said it. Then the files need to move, Hollis said. Tonight. Tonight, he agreed. They moved the files that evening. Not to the shop that would be too obvious if Prescott started making inquiries about who had bought Unit 114. Hollis had a secondary space, a storage area above the shop that was technically part of the building's residential level and not commercially listed anywhere. The 3 boxes went up the back stairs and into a room that smelled like old paint and held a broken rocking chair and a table that had been moved there a decade ago and not moved since. Audra stayed that night. The room with the broken rocking chair had a cot in it and a window that looked out at the alley behind the building and a lock on the door that worked. Hollis brought her soup from the diner on the corner and did not make a production of it. He set it on the table and said, there are extra blankets in the hall closet, and left. She sat in the room with the 3 boxes and a bowl of soup and her phone at 32%. She opened the second box. She had not finished the first box's individual section. She had stopped after reading 3 folders. She went back to where she'd left off. 4th folder, 5th. She was on the 34th folder when her hand stopped. Myrna Elaine Pratt, 412 Caldwell Street. She stared at the name. It was the same address Myrna had written on the piece of paper. The piece of paper that was in the inside pocket of her jacket. The one that said, in case you need an address. 412 Caldwell Street. Her former address. Date of transaction, March 14th. Last year. Method, fraudulent tax lien. Forged documentation claiming back taxes owed amount $34,000. Property seized through accelerated legal process before property owner could obtain legal representation. Market value of property at time of seizure, $187,000. Settlement offered and accepted under conditions of urgency, $0. Net loss to property owner, $187,000. Note in Walter's handwriting in the margin, this case is representative. Mrs. Pratt had no legal representation and was not informed she could contest. She signed the transfer of deed believing she was signing an extension of payment time. Audra closed the folder. She was very still. She thought about this bus station, the fluorescent lights, a woman 74 years old sitting very straight with both hands wrapped around a canvas tote bag, watching a door her daughter wasn't coming through. They said I had to leave. I signed some things. I didn't understand most of what they told me. She didn't know what she signed. She lost $187,000, and she didn't know what she signed. And Walter knew. He had this folder. He had her name, her address, the specific details of exactly how it had been done and what it had cost her. And he had kept it, filed it, documented it with the same meticulous care as the other 41 folders. She put the folder back in the box. She took out her phone. She looked at the piece of paper with Myrna's number. It was 9:47 p.m. She was not sure if calling at 9:47 p.m. was reasonable. Then she thought about a woman sitting in a bus station until 11:30 because her daughter forgot to come and decided that Myrna was probably awake. She dialed. 2 rings. Hello, Myrna's voice. Alert, slightly cautious. The alertness of someone who had learned that late phone calls sometimes carried difficult news. Myrna, it's Audra from the bus station. A pause, then, oh. The caution went out of the voice. Audra, are you all right? She said, I'm okay. I found somewhere to stay. She paused. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me if it's too much. Go ahead. She said, your house, the one you lost. Do you remember the name of the company that handled the paperwork? A long silence. Why are you asking that? Myrna said. Audra looked at the 3 boxes on the table. She said, because I think I might have found something that has your name in it. Silence. Then, what kind of something? She said, the kind that might explain what happened to your house. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This one had weight to it. The weight of a person who had spent 14 months not understanding something and was suddenly standing at the edge of possibly understanding it. Myrna said, tell me. Audra told her what she could. Not everything. Not the full scope of it, because she didn't fully understand the full scope of it herself yet. But she told her about the storage unit, and the files, and the 42 names, and what she had read in folder number 34. When she finished, Myrna was quiet. Then she said, he knew. This man, he knew what happened to me. He documented it, Audra said. He knew it was wrong and he wrote it all down. Another long pause. He died, Myrna said, 3 weeks ago. Myrna made a sound that was not quite a word. Not grief exactly. More like the recognition of something. He was trying to help, she said. All that time. Yes. And then you found it. Audra looked around the room with the broken rocking chair and the 3 boxes and the window looking out at the alley. Yes, she said, I found it. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not about strategy or plans. About Walter, a man neither of them had known, who had spent 12 years writing down the names of people he couldn't help fast enough and had trusted a stranger to pick up what he had to set down. When they hung up, Audra sat with her phone in her hands for a long time. Then she opened the list Walter had left in the second envelope. She found Dana Krell's number. She found the name of the journalist above it, a woman named M. Holt, who had a byline at the city paper that Audra had seen on bulletin boards. She put the list on the table next to the 3 boxes, Tomorrow she would call Dana Krell. Tonight she read. She opened the third box, and at the very bottom, underneath the last section of documentation, underneath everything Walter had accumulated, she found the sealed envelope. No name on the outside. Just one line in that square, practical handwriting. For whoever finds this, open last. She did not open it. Not tonight. She put it on the table next to the list. She turned off the lamp. She lay on the cot in the dark room above Hollis Cade's shop, and she listened to the city outside, and she thought about 42 people and one man who had spent 30 years writing their names down, because he believed that if you documented something carefully enough and waited long enough, eventually the right person would arrive. She was 18 years old. She had $19 and a room key and a cot and 3 boxes. He left this for someone who would arrive after he was gone and couldn't do anything about what they found except go forward. Okay. She closed her eyes. She was going forward. She called Dana Krell at 8:15 in the morning. She had rehearsed what she was going to say while she brushed her teeth with a travel toothbrush she'd found in her backpack, which was itself a small mercy. The kind of small mercy that felt significant when the rest of your situation was what hers was. She had rehearsed it 3 times, revised it twice, and then when Dana Krell's voicemail picked up on the 4th ring, she said none of what she'd rehearsed. She said, "My name is Audra Lowe. I have Walter Doss's files, all of them. 3 boxes, organized and complete. He left your name." She left the number for the motel room. Then she paused and said, "Please call back soon. Someone came to the storage unit yesterday." She hung up. 11 minutes later, her phone rang. Dana Krell's voice was the voice of someone who had already been awake for 2 hours and was already 3 problems into her day. Efficient, clipped. Not unkind, but not warm either. The voice of someone who conserved warmth for occasions that required it. She said, "Tell me about the boxes." Audra told her. Everything. The auction, the watches, the hidden floor in the trunk, the 3 document boxes, the 42 individual folders, the tabs and the cross-referencing, and the annotations in Walter's handwriting. She described Prescott Vane appearing at the storage unit with a lawyer. She described him looking at the trunk. When she finished, Dana was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "You moved the files." "Yes." "Where?" Audra told her. Dana said, "Good, don't move them again until I get there." Then Audra, "Yes. Did he threaten you, Vane? Did he say anything that could be construed as a threat?" She thought about the pleasant voice, the measured tone. "Enjoy your weekend." "No," she said. "He was very polite. He will send a lawyer's letter, probably within the week. Do not respond to it. Do not engage with it. Do not acknowledge it. Forward it to me directly. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good." A pause. "Walter told me about this 2 years ago when he first contacted me. He said he needed more time to complete the documentation." Dana's voice shifted slightly, just slightly. "He didn't tell me what form the complete version would arrive in, or who would bring it." Another pause. "I've been waiting." Audra said, "He left a list. You were on it." "I know," Dana said. "He told me he'd made one. Then I'll be there this afternoon." Dana Krell was in her mid-40s and had the posture of someone who had spent years leaning over documents and had made a deliberate decision to fix it. She came in with a briefcase and a laptop bag, and nothing else, looked around the room above the shop with an appraising glance that took in the 3 boxes and the broken rocking chair and Audra and Hollis standing on opposite sides of the table, and said, "Good, you kept them together." She sat down and started working. Audra watched her go through the first box the way she had watched the auctioneer from a slight distance, taking in the shape of it before committing to a position. Dana moved through files with the speed of someone who had learned to read this type of documentation quickly and extract what mattered. After 40 minutes, she closed the first box and opened the second. Hollis had made coffee. At the third box, Dana slowed down. At the individual folders, she stopped. She read them the way Audra had read them, one by one. She did not make sounds while she read. She did not react visibly. But at the 34th folder, she paused the same way Audra had paused. She read the name. She read the note in Walter's handwriting in the margin. She said, "You know this woman." "I met her," Audra said, "at the bus station, the night I got kicked out before I found the unit." Dana looked up at her. She had no idea what she'd signed, Audra said. She said a lawyer called and she didn't understand most of what they told her. Dana set the folder down. She said, "This is the strongest individual case in the set, not because the amount is the largest, because the documentation of how they misrepresented the paperwork is the clearest." She tapped the folder. Walter knew what he was doing. She finished the third box. She sat back. She said, "This is sufficient," not with triumph, with the flat tone of a person who had been waiting for sufficient for a long time and was now taking stock of what it meant. "This is more than sufficient. This is organized, dated, cross-referenced, and annotated by a credentialed professional with 38 years of forensic accounting experience." She looked at Hollis. "Did you know what he had?" "No," Hollis said. "I knew he was worried about something. He mentioned Prescott sometimes. He didn't tell me specifics." Dana looked at Audra. "And you found this in a storage unit?" "For $10, Audra said. Something moved across Dana's face that might have been the suppressed beginning of something. Not a smile exactly. The acknowledgement that the situation contained an irony that would be appropriate to appreciate later. "He stopped paying the storage fees deliberately," Audra said. "He wanted it to go to auction." "He told me that was possible," Dana said. "He said if things got worse with Prescott, he had a plan that didn't involve me or anyone else he'd contacted. He said it was safer not to know." She paused. "He was careful." Hollis said he was. The lawyer's letter arrived 3 days later. Hollis signed for it. He called Audra while she was at the library where she had taken to going each morning to use the computers and the free Wi-Fi and to sit in a place with stable temperature and no ongoing emotional emergencies that she was aware of. He read her the letter over the phone. It was 4 pages of legal language condensed into a single essential claim that the items in storage unit 114 included property belonging to the estate of Walter Harold Doss, that as sole heir, Prescott Vane had legal standing to request their return, and that Audra's purchase of the unit's contents had been made in good faith but could not constitute legal ownership of estate documents under the relevant statutes. She photographed the text and sent it to Dana. Dana texted back in 40 seconds, "Do not respond. I'll handle this." Then she called, which was more efficient. She said, "He's guessing. He doesn't know for certain what you have or where it is. The letter is designed to get a response that tells him more than he already knows." She paused. "Don't give him anything." "I won't. There's something else." Dana's voice shifted register, just enough that Audra noticed. "I made a call this morning to a contact at the DA's office. Someone Walter had on his list. He noted she had been waiting for a complete evidentiary package." A pause. "She's interested. Very interested. She wants to meet." Audra said, "When?" "Friday." "Okay." "Audra," the name said with a weight that meant something was being said inside the name itself. "This is going to become a larger situation. You understand that?" She said, "I know." She said, "I'm okay with that." She hung up and sat in the library for a moment looking at the computer screen and thinking about what larger situation meant when you were 18 years old with $19 and had not yet figured out a permanent place to sleep. Then she thought one thing at a time. She opened the browser and started reading about real estate fraud statutes in this state. The phone rang on a Wednesday evening. Not Dana, not Hollis, not Myrna, whose number she had now called 3 more times to report incremental progress in terms she thought Myrna could follow without the full legal complexity. Her mother. She looked at the name on the screen for 2 rings. Then she answered. "Audra?" Carol's voice, quiet, careful, like a person stepping onto ice they weren't sure would hold. "Mom." A pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Where are you staying?" She was not ready to answer that question fully. She said, somewhere safe. Another pause. Longer. The kind that meant something was working its way up through layers of something else to reach the surface. Carol said, I need to tell you something. Audra said nothing. Waited. Bart works for Vane Group, Carol said. Has for 7 years. He's a contractor. Site work development prep. That's what he does. She paused. I knew this. I've always known this. I just didn't know what Vane Group was. Audra said, okay. The night he told you to leave? Carol stopped. Started again. He got a text at dinner. He went to the kitchen and came back different. He told you to go, and I asked him after, when it was just us, what happened. Audra waited. He said someone from Prescott Vane's office had texted him about a storage unit going to auction. He said it needed to be dealt with and he needed to go early the next morning. She took a breath. I asked him why you had to leave for that. He said he didn't want you in the house asking questions while he was out. Audra sat with that, because there it was. The thing she had been carrying since the click of the deadbolt. The thing that had a shape she couldn't quite name. Not pure hurt, because hurt was too simple, and not quite anger, because anger required an object she could hold still long enough to aim at. It was more like the sensation of a picture coming into focus that you had been looking at from too close to read. She got kicked out because of the storage unit. Not because Bart had reached some general limit with her presence. Not because of a fight or a decision or a month of cumulative tension. Because of a specific text message on a specific evening about a specific storage unit that he needed to handle before anyone got there first. And she had gotten there first. For $10. She said, did he know what was in the unit? I don't think so, Carol said. I think he just knew it was important. That's how it works with Prescott, from what Bart said. You handle things without knowing why, and you don't ask. A pause. Audra, I need to ask you something. Okay. Did you find something in the unit? She thought about the 3 boxes sitting upstairs above a pawn shop. She thought about folder 34 with Myrna Elaine Pratt's name typed at the top and Walter's note in the margin. She said yes. Carol's breath went in and stayed for a moment. Then is it bad for Prescott Vane? It's going to be, Audra said. Yes. Silence. Then Carol said something that Audra did not expect. Not from the woman who had stood behind frosted glass with her hands at her sides and not said a word. Carol said, what do you need from me? Audra's throat did something. She kept her voice level. She was practiced at this. She said, there's an attorney. Her name is Dana Krell. She might need to talk to you about what Bart said that night. About the text, about what you heard. She paused. It would help. The silence that followed was the longest one. Long enough that Audra counted to 14 in her head without meaning to. Then Carol said, I'll talk to her. She said it quietly, without drama, the way of someone who had been holding something for a long time and had made the decision to set it down. Audra said, Mom, I know, Carol said. I know. She said, I'm sorry for not. I know, Audra said again. They were not all the way there. She understood that. Forgiveness was not a single phone call, and she was not going to pretend otherwise, and Carol was not going to pretend otherwise. And that was actually the most honest thing that had happened between them in a long time. But they were somewhere they had not been the week before, and that was something. After she hung up, she sat for a few minutes, and then she sent Dana a text that said, my mother may be a witness. She heard Bart Lowe speak about the unit the night I was removed from the house. Bart works for Vane Group. Dana called back in 8 minutes. She said, tell me everything. The meeting with the DA's office was on Friday morning. Not Audra's meeting, Dana's. Audra was not in the room, but Dana called her after from the parking lot before she got back in the car. They're moving, Dana said. Audra said, how fast? Fast. The documentation is comprehensive enough that they can open a formal investigation without needing to build from scratch. Walter did their job for them over 30 years. A pause. They're going to want to talk to you, not as a suspect, as a witness to the documentation's discovery and chain of custody. Okay. And to Myrna Pratt, she's the strongest individual case, like I said. She'll talk to you. I know. I've already called her. Another pause. Audra, the letter. The one you said was at the bottom of the third box addressed for whoever finds this. She had not opened it. She had moved it to the inside pocket of her jacket and carried it every day for a week and had not opened it. She said, I haven't opened it yet. Silence. Open it tonight, Dana said. Not because it's legally relevant, because I think you should. She opened it that night. She sat on the cot in the room above the shop, same as she had every night for the past 10 days, and she took the envelope out of her jacket pocket and turned it over in her hands once, and then twice, and then she opened it. 3 pages. The handwriting was Walter's. Square. Practical. But different from the formal letter she had read to this point. Not the voice of a professional producing documentation. Something else. Closer. He wrote that he was 81 years old and had known for some months that his health was going to become a factor in whether the documentation ever reached someone who could use it. He wrote that he had spent 12 years trying to get various people to take the files seriously and had failed each time because the files, though meticulous, had never been organized into a complete presentable package that was ready to submit. He wrote that organizing them fully while managing the ongoing legal pressure from Prescott, who by then had figured out that Walter had documentation of some kind, though not where had been more than he could do alone. He wrote that he was tired. He wrote it plainly, not as complaint, as fact. He wrote, I have a plan that I believe is sound, but that requires me to trust something I cannot fully control. It requires me to trust that the person who arrives will be the right person. I don't know how to be certain of this. I only know that the wrong person would have done one of 2 things: immediately sold the watches or handed everything to Prescott after he appeared at the door. The right person is whoever didn't do either of those things. He wrote about his son, Marcus, born 1967, died 1999. An accident on a job site, the kind that happened when safety protocols were inadequate and corners had been cut by the company running the site. Marcus had been 32. He wrote, my son was the kind of young man who picked things up other people left behind. Not because he expected something from it, because he thought things had value that other people missed. I watched him do it his whole life. I watched him do it until I couldn't watch him anymore. He wrote, whoever finds this is not my son. I know that. But you found something other people walked past, and you stayed with it. And that is enough for me to say what I need to say to you, which is whatever happens after this, you did something that mattered. Not because of the money or the legal consequences or what the documentation produces. Because you saw something in a unit that everyone else dismissed and you paid $10 for it and you stayed. He wrote, I am leaving you the watches, not as payment, as a beginning. Whatever comes from the legal proceedings is not yours to receive as compensation that belongs to the 42. But the watches I bought over 20 years as a reminder to myself that things held value other people missed. I want them to be yours for the same reason. He wrote, I don't know your name. I don't know anything about you. I know you arrived when you were supposed to arrive, and I'm grateful. He wrote, take care of yourself. The world is full of things other people have left behind. You have proven you know what to do with them. He signed it, Walter Doss, CPA, retired. She sat with the letter for a long time. The room was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what it did in the evening. Occasional cars, a door closing, somewhere below, the distant sound of a bus pulling away from a corner. She thought about Marcus Doss picking things up other people left behind. She thought about a storage unit that had sat unnoticed with its $10 price tag. She thought about what it meant that Walter had not known her name and had not needed to. That what he had built had been designed for whoever arrived, not for anyone specific, not for someone he had already chosen. The right person was whoever didn't do the wrong things. And she had simply not done the wrong things. Not out of virtue exactly. More out of instinct. The same instinct that had made her sit in the library for hours reading about watches before selling them. The same instinct that had made her read the folders all the way through, even after the scope of it became frightening. Paying attention. That was the thing Marcus had done, that Walter had admired, that Walter had trusted a stranger to do. She folded the letter and put it back in the inside pocket of her jacket. Prescott Vane was arrested on a Thursday morning. She was not there when it happened. She heard about it from Donna, who called at 9:50 a.m. before Audra had finished the coffee Hollis had left in the small electric kettle on the table that had appeared there without comment 4 days ago. Dana said it happened this morning. Federal and state charges combined mail fraud, wire fraud, predatory lending, and 3 counts of document forgery with enough documentation to support all of it. A pause. Vane Group's accounts are frozen as of this morning. Audra said nothing. She stood at the window looking at the alley. Dana said there will be a period of proceedings. This is not over today. It will be a long process. A pause. But it started. Audra said the 42 families. The DA's office is reaching out to each one. They'll have representation. That's already being arranged. Another pause. Myrna Pratt is on the first call list. She thought about Myrna in the bus station holding her canvas bag with both hands, watching a door her daughter wasn't coming through. She said, "Good." After she hung up, she stood at the window for another few minutes. Then she went downstairs. Hollis was at the counter. He looked up when she came in. She didn't say anything. He looked at her face and understood. He said, "Coffee's fresh." She sat on the stool at the corner of the counter. He poured her a cup. He didn't ask questions. He had the quality of a person who knew when the moment called for presence rather than words. After a while, she said, "Walter wrote that the watches were mine." Hollis nodded slowly, like this was not a surprise. "Not as payment," she said, "as a beginning." He said, "That sounds like him." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "I've been thinking about what to do," she said, "with the beginning." Hollis waited. She said, "I want to go back to school, eventually." She paused. "I want to learn something formal, not watches specifically, but something about how things get valued, how you know what something is worth when other people don't." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "That's a good thing to want to learn." She said, "The watches, the right sale, the right buyer," you said 45 to 55. "With time and the right contacts, yes." "I don't need all of it immediately," she said. "I just need enough to stop worrying about where I'm sleeping." He said, "I know someone, a collector in the city. He buys by appointment and pays fair because he doesn't like to negotiate." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "I can make an introduction." She said, "Not all 6. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "I'm keeping one," she said. "Walter said he bought them as reminders, that things hold value other people missed." She paused. "I want a reminder." Hollis said, "Which one?" She thought about it. "The one you looked at second," she said. "The one where you stopped and put your reading glasses on." He nodded. "A Longines, 1964. His first good purchase, I think. He told me about it once." He set his cup down. "He would have liked that you kept it." The first sale happened 3 weeks later. Not all 5. 2 of them to the collector Hollis introduced her to in a meeting that lasted 40 minutes in a room that smelled like good furniture and old money, and took her very specifically out of the realm of experience she had lived in for the past month. The collector looked at the watches with the same unhurried attention Hollis had and made an offer that was in the range Dana had described, and Audra had said yes to a number that was lower than the top of the range, because lower and immediate was better than higher and uncertain. She walked out with enough to pay Hollis back for the motel room and the soup and the coffee, which he initially refused to accept, and then accepted when she said quietly, "Please let me do this." She walked out with enough to pay the first and last month on a small apartment in a building 3 neighborhoods over in a part of the city where things were ordinary and functional and had no particular history attached to them. She walked out with enough for a new coat because November had become December and her old jacket, while still carrying Walter's letter in the inside pocket, was not adequately warm. She kept the other 3 watches in the black box. She kept the black box on the desk in the apartment. She kept the flat key on a small ring attached to her new key because keys that fit things were worth having, even when the thing they fit was far away. In January, she filed the enrollment paperwork at the community college 2 miles from the apartment, the GED she had earned the spring before Bart's situation changed. Everything had finally found its purpose and signed up for 2 courses, one in accounting principles and one in appraisal and valuation theory. On a Sunday morning that same month, she drove with Myrna to the street where Myrna's house had been. Not in Myrna's daughter's car the daughter had offered, but Myrna said she wanted to go without someone worrying over her every reaction, and Audra had borrowed a car from a classmate she had just met in her accounting course. They parked at the corner. The house was occupied. That was the thing they had been told and knew intellectually, but which was different to see. Someone had painted the front door a different color. There was a new mailbox. Myrna looked at it for a long time. She said, "Different curtains." Audra said nothing. Myrna said, "The garden looks neglected." Audra looked. The side garden, what Myrna had described as the garden her husband had planted in their first year there, was overgrown and shapeless. Someone had let it go. Myrna said, 31 years I kept that garden." She shook her head slightly, not with anger, more like the acknowledgement of something. "He planted the rose bush, the October variety. It bloomed every fall." Audra looked at the garden. She looked at the house. She thought about Walter's note in the margin of folder 34. Mrs. Pratt had no legal representation and was not informed she could contest. He knew. He sat in his apartment and he typed her name into a file folder and wrote down what had been done to her, and he kept it and he organized it and he trusted it to a stranger, and the stranger had found it in a storage unit for $10. And now there was a proceeding, and the proceeding was slow and complicated and may or may not give Myrna her house back, but it would at minimum tell her what she signed. It would tell her what they did. It would give her name to a court and a judge and a record that would say this woman was deceived. What was done to her was wrong. It was documented. Here it is. Myrna turned away from the house. She said, "Ready?" Audra said yes. They drove back. On the way, Myrna was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That man, Walter." "Yes." "I never met him." "No." "He knew my name." "Yes." Myrna looked at the passing street. "He just wrote it down in a folder. Kept it." "For years," Audra said. Myrna was quiet again. Then she said, "That's a kind of company, isn't it? Even if you don't know it." Audra thought about that. For 14 months, Myrna had been alone with what happened to her. Not truly alone. There were her daughters, her granddaughter, who had set up the phone, the friends who had brought casseroles in the weeks after. But alone with the weight of not knowing. Alone with the version of events that said this happened to me, and I didn't understand why, and there was nothing to be done. And all that time in a storage unit, she had never heard of a man she had never met, had kept her name in a folder, had written in the margin, "This case is representative." She was not informed she could contest. He had seen her, even without knowing her. She said, "Yes, I think it is." On the last Saturday of January, she went back to Unit 114. The facility had already cleared the couch, and the boxes and the garden tools items not worth selling had been discarded, and the few things that had any resale value had been taken by the facility to offset administrative costs, which was standard practice, and which she had known when she transferred what mattered elsewhere. The unit was empty. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the metal door. No smell of dust anymore. The cold air that came from an empty concrete box in January had no memory in it, just mineral and neutral and waiting the way all empty spaces waited before someone decided what to do with them. She stood in the empty unit for a few minutes. Not ceremony, not closure in the performative sense. More like acknowledgement. The way you stood for a moment in a place where something happened before you went on to wherever you were going next. She thought about Bart's text message on a Friday evening changing the direction of things. She thought about a $10 bid in a room that smelled like old fabric and time. She thought about Marcus Doss, who picked things up other people left behind. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the small key on its ring, the flat key that had opened the bin in the box in the trunk. She turned it in her fingers once. She looked at the concrete floor of the empty unit. She set the key down in the center of the floor. Not because she didn't need keys. She had keys now. She had a key to an apartment that was hers, and a key to a community college locker, and a key to the shop which Hollis had given her without ceremony 2 weeks ago, when she had started spending a few hours there each Saturday learning what he knew. She set the key down because this one had been Walter's, and it belonged to the room it had opened, and she had taken everything from that room that she was meant to take. She stepped back. She pulled the metal door down. It made the sound metal doors made. Heavy. Final. The closing of something. She stood outside the unit for one more moment. Then she turned around. She walked back through the facility in the direction of the entrance, past other units with their numbered doors, past the small office where the manager was doing something administrative that didn't involve looking up, past the list of auction dates posted on the board near the main door. She stopped. She looked at the board. Next auction, February 8th, 6 units, cash only. She stood at the board for a moment, then she took out her phone. She photographed the auction listing. Then she walked out into January.